I'm just going to read out Sophie Devonshire's bio. I'm sure we don't need it, but just in case, because it's quite an amazing story. Sophie is an experienced business leader, entrepreneur, marketeer, and best-selling author. Across her career, she's worked in and with multinational companies, including Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola, as well as high-growth startups and agencies, Leo Burnett in the Middle East and Interbrand in London. She also has personal experience of being a successful entrepreneur, setting up her own award-winning e-commerce business, which she sold, before running a luxury gifts business and then moving on to become CEO of the Caffeine Partnership, an award-winning business consultancy. In June 2020, she was appointed CEO of the Marketing Society, the global network of marketing leaders. Sophie is passionate about connecting ideas and people and works to help inspire leaders make a difference to the future of business. An impatient accelerator, she specializes in understanding questions of pace and purpose in business. So welcome, Sophie. This is your second book. I think the first one was called Superfast. This is the second one called LoveWork, which I have had a great joy in reading. And Sophie co-wrote this with Ben Renshaw. So maybe we just should have a quick intro to Ben so we do him justice for all his work in this project.
Brilliant. Thanks, Elaine. And hi, everybody. Brilliant to see you all. Great to have this session on a Monday, actually, when we're talking about how you feel about work. So a bit of a good day to do it. So I was really lucky to be invited by Ben Renshaw to write this book with him. Didn't feel lucky halfway through it. The timing of it was interesting. But Ben was introduced to me by a mutual friend, a photographer called Cambridge Jones, Paul Barrow, who's a member of the Marketing Society. And he said, I think the two of you have got a lot to talk about. Ben Renshaw is an incredible coach, advisor, somebody who's really passionate about helping people be better at their work. He works with lots of CEOs and other people. And he writes books to help him think. And he'd spent all this time coaching and working with people, helping them rediscover or reevaluate their relationships with work. So he approached me and said, let's write a book together. And I'd never written a book with someone before. And I would thoroughly recommend it as a way of working with somebody, a partnership with someone, the sort of creative abrasion you get when you argue over things, when you bring two different perspectives, the storytelling is great. And Ben is a particularly lovely person. So I said yes to writing the book, by the way, and then I changed job. So I joined the Marketing Society, as Elaine said, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was a fascinating time to take on any role, particularly a global organization which had lots of in real life events. So there were several moments in the first few months where I said to Ben, I just can't do this. I can't write a book as well. But actually the beauty of working in partnership with somebody is that they are very good at doing a lot of the work. So a lot of this is Ben's point of view, but also it really helped me think about my relationship with my new job by doing this role with somebody who is an amazing coach, friend, advisor, somebody to listen to. So we had an awful lot of Saturday mornings together, early morning on Saturdays, discussing this question about, what's love got to do with work and how do you make it work?
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. I don't know whether you can see my copy. It is just full of stickers. And that's not just because I had to read it and remember for today. I just found myself thinking here's all the mistakes I've ever made. Here's all the lessons I've ever learned and the great advice I've ever been given, brought together in one book. So to me, it feels almost like a handbook for life. And the reason it got lots of pencil scribbles inside it, because I felt that it isn't something you read and then say, I read that book and put it on my bookshelf, but it's something you keep dipping into and referring to, because there is just so much in here. So I would commend it to everybody. Sophie didn't pay me to say that, by the way. Right at the back on page 240, the last paragraph, it talks about being a pragmatic guide to making the most of what is within your smart personal control. It's about making considered choices and understanding the behavioral science and psychology behind what you can do to flourish and feel fulfilled. It's about believing it's possible to take action to shape and develop a bigger, better, bolder way of working with more meaning. So I felt, that's, even though that's the last thing that says, I almost wanted to share that first, because it felt like what an inspiring book to have in your hands. But right at the start, it says, this book is for you if you're moving up through your work, moving on to a new role, or simply want to move faster and go further. When you started writing it, Sophie, who did you think your audience would be?
Well, I guess the first thing before I talk about that, Elaine, is just to say how happy it makes me to see those post-it notes in the book, because you gave me a really lovely introduction. But the only relevant thing really about me and being here is that you need to know is that I really love it when there are things that I'm doing that are helpful to others. So, I mean, we wrote this, both Ben and I, we wrote this genuinely to help. I have had a squiggly career, as Helen Tupper would put it, and done lots of different things. And it's been stripy in terms of how I felt about work. So we spend 90,000 hours of our lives at work. And the idea that you can be stuck in situations which really aren't right for you is horrific. But so often the advice is, yeah, you've got to get out, you've got to pursue your passion, you've got to move. And Ben and I both felt that we'd had conversations with people who'd managed to reshape, rediscover, recraft, spend time working out how work could work for them. And actually, some of the insights about how they did that could be incredibly valuable for everybody. So yeah, I've had moments. My first job, I fell completely in love with marketing. I was at Procter & Gamble, marketing business. The guy who is now my husband, which was not a particularly convenient thing because he went on to leave marketing and do very different things, which made a much more squiggly career for me. But I loved it. And part of the reason he left, he was at Procter & Gamble with me, so you could see how it wasn't something he loved as much. So a very early lesson, A/B testing, right? That you can have the most amazing company, but if it isn't the right fit, it isn't right for you. So, we use the word love in the title of this, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, it's a bit of a provocation, because you are never, ever, ever going to spend every single hour of every hour you spend at work totally in love with what you're doing. There are some pretty gritty things you have to do, and sometimes it's really hard. But in the same way as in any relationship, it's never all going to be romps and roses, right? But overall, the idea that you can, in the privileged position that we're all in the kind of knowledge work that we do, that you can shape and build a better relationship with work, felt to us very, very important to share with everybody. And to talk about it as a relationship helps remind everybody that it's not just a case of complaining about the work and your bosses and what's going on, but actually thinking about what agency you have. And like in a relationship, you always have the agency to leave. That can be the decision. But often with a bit of therapy, with a bit of thought, you can rebuild, rediscover something that actually really works for you. So we wrote it, particularly inspired, and writing it through the pandemic when people were really, really, finding work particularly hard was fascinating. And I'm getting letters from people all the time, letters with quill pens, emails, messages on LinkedIn from people all the time who've read it and said it just allowed them a bit of a pause amidst the super fast, crazy world we live in, and a bit of a framework to really think carefully about what they wanted to move on to next, or the conversations they could have with their bosses, or some of the things they could do on a day-to-day basis to be a little happier in the relationships they had with work.
You just talked about that time to pause and reflect, and that's the first part of the book, isn't it? I should say it's split into 3 sections. So that's discover, develop, and deliver. So that first part is all around that discovery, and you brought all this together in a 3D. It's called the 3D LoveWork model, if I've got that correct. I don't know whether it's helpful to perhaps just share a little bit about that model with everybody, because then we can build from that as the conversation goes on.
Yeah, so I talked just then about the bit where I loved being at work, and there have been moments. There have also been a couple of times in my career where I felt really, really trapped, in toxic relationships, the ones that just weren't right for me. And as with so many people, when I was in that situation, working through why isn't this working for me, and what do I do about it, and what are the choices I make was really helpful. And then I think you can see my lovely 3D model behind us. I don't want to go through the whole detail of it all and every single step, but for Ben and I, when we talked to a number of different people who had shared their stories with us, it felt like they were the simplest 3 steps. And anyone working in brand and marketing will also, I'm sure, understand the first step very, very importantly. So that bit of know thyself, the discovery process, which you do with brands, which you do with yourself. So that's the foundational piece. I think it's Benjamin Franklin who said there are 3 things that are hard in this world: a diamond, steel, and to know thyself. And every single successful or happy leader I've spoken to always talks about a moment in their leadership journey or in their life where they allow themselves that time to really look at what it is that fuels them. What is their purpose, which we will all have talked about in marketing kind sessions, but the personal purpose and being able to identify that is the most amazing filter and foundations for decisions you make. I'd actually done that work before a clever headhunter called me up and said, "Oh, there's this job going at the Marketing Society." And in the conversation, I went along for interviews and to see what was there. And Craig Ingalls, who's the chair, asked me what my personal purpose was, what I wanted to do. And when we talked about that, there was a brilliant fit. So, that really understanding yourself and spending a bit of time to discover who you are, talking to other people and build that up feels very self-indulgent, but it is incredibly helpful. And then the develop piece is actually, there's some conscious practice you can go through. There's some habits that you can get into, because it's not just about finding the love of your life. It's not just about finding the match, but it's about building a healthy relationship and understanding how that can work. And then the delivery piece is just making sure you make it happen, because for a lot of us, I think, it's very easy to know the theory, to talk about what you want to do, but putting that into becoming a thing or shaping it or finding a sense of purpose that is actually put into practice, and that delivery piece is just incredible. Again, having a framework we thought would help people with the conversation. So.
And how did it help you? You just said the clever headhunter phoned you up and you had thought about your own personal purpose. Particularly as you get a little bit further up, perhaps into the develop and deliver, how did that frame how you approached that new job? Because you'd gone from running the Caffeine Society, which I think was sort of a consultancy and coaching organization. And then you went into running a big membership organization. So quite different. How did it help you set yourself up for success in your new role?
So the Caffeine Partnership was, it's very different. So I was working with all kinds of different companies, looking at what they were doing. So there were similarities, but there is, taking over a 64-year-old organization, the responsibility of that at a particularly challenging time. I think what was brilliant about writing the book at the time is that there were some practices that you can go through and look at. I mean, at a very basic level, one of my favorite pieces in the book is that emphasis on, rather than a to-do list, the to-be list, setting a conscious intent every single day. And it's 3 years ago now. I was just saying to Paul and Anne, 3 years ago that the pandemic started, which is crazy, right? It feels like yesterday in some ways, but also 20 years ago. But I remember going into a new role, meeting members and board members across the world through Zoom, and the need to really set your intention about what kind of person you wanted to be, how you wanted to be with other people every single day. And that kind of conscious, deliberate practice, I think, was really helpful. I mean, I'm sure everybody here went through huge roller coasters at that time, working out, what kind of person they wanted to be on Zoom, and how they wanted to build, we talk about LoveWork as a relationship, but also particularly in the chapter on give and get, it is all about relationships and understanding other people and understanding yourself and how you trigger under pressure, how you work your way through the difficult times. So yeah, it was really helpful.
Some of my favorite, there's these little boxes in the book that calls out little captions, and some of them really resonated with me, and I think I probably will link across a lot of the conversations and dialogues we've had in Marketing Kind. Linking to Paul's book, maybe purpose is the key ingredient that fuels you. Great conversations lead to great work. That one really resonated with me because somebody once said to me, the only thing that goes wrong at work is that the right conversation hasn't taken place. And the minute I heard that, I kind of reflected back and thought, this is absolutely right. I think this one relates to what you've just said, Sophie. Developing your criteria for work contextualizes your key decisions. Business is a relationship. Being curious helps you navigate any situation, and adaptation requires a growth mindset. So a lot of that about kind of what we need to do, the work we need to show up to do every day, requires this whole set of skills. Did you have any particular phrases or things that have really resonated with you in your career?
Oh, I think there's something that's in this whole relationship we have within Marketing Kind, within the society as well, which is the Eleanor Roosevelt quote. So Eleanor Roosevelt, who was an amazing change maker in her own right, always talked about, although was famous for just being the wife of an American president, but founded lots of United Nations human rights things. And she always said, we must learn from other people's mistakes. Life is too short to make them all ourselves. And I think for me, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, one of the reasons I love being part of Marketing Kind and the Marketing Society, that ability to learn from other people's stories, to hear and understand that there may be ways to speed up our own thinking towards success. And that for me is part of the curious side of it all. It's really helpful sometimes to understand how other people have got through the tricky times at work, the moments when the relationship with work is a bit stale, or feels like there are some things going on that need a bit more openness and transparency. So I think learning from others and like-minded people, even if they have different perspectives, is really, really helpful.
You reflect a lot on the experiences you've had, either coaching leaders or working with leaders, teams doing things, as well as your own personal insights. As you started writing the book, did anything jump out at you, any key insights that maybe you weren't aware of when you started?
I think it's just the more time we spent talking to people about this, the more we realize that this idea of loving work it's a mindset, it's a skill set, and it helps to have the toolkit, to have a framework to work it through. So, do you greet the day, God, good morning, or good morning? Do you rise and shine? Do you rise and whine? The attitude, the mindset towards it, the optimism bias that a lot of entrepreneurs have, for example. Can you have an optimism bias when it comes to work? There's definitely a mindset piece, which can be sharpened, can be explored. And that came out from a lot of the people we spoke to and the research we looked at. And then that skill set, that idea that it's a capability. So it's not just luck. I've managed to find myself in the best job ever. Especially, for people who have mortgages, they have responsibilities, they have, you can't always jump into pursuing your passion, or that passion may not be right for you. So Ben's story, Ben was a violinist, he was at the Yehudi Menuhin School of he was amazing, but he was just like, this isn't right for me. And you see the shininess of his eyes when he comes back from having done a great coaching session, or he's been working with, guys at Heathrow on their team development, and he's in the right place for him. So that piece of understanding you have to be in the right place, but also that you work at it and you make it work, and you understand how you can evolve in roles. So there was a lot of that, I think. the other thing that I think struck me and I kind of knew it beforehand, but talking to people was interesting, was the shaping piece. And again, there are lots of reasons for us to be miserable about the world in which we live right now. I mean, we do all know there are plenty of challenges, but from a work point of view, the ability most of us have to shape what we're doing a little bit, but also to shape the roles and the teams around us. Stacey will know, within the Marketing Society, we have evolved, I'd say 80% of the roles of people across the last year and a half to help them do more of what they love, what they're good at, and what the business needs, the beautiful bit within that, and to allow people to play to their strengths, to play to what they love. It's incredibly motivating, sensible, efficient, all these things. So I think that was the other thing for me, hearing more stories of people who'd done that, who'd been in a certain role and reshaped it for themselves, or had managed to reshape their teams to allow people to thrive a little bit more, rather than to continue to do things that weren't particularly their thing. I mean, our first jobs we were always told, here's your development areas, you've got to get these, be better at those. And of course, there are some things you have to be good at, and you have to understand the profit and loss, or whatever it is. But beyond that, you can end up doing more of what you love, which helps you love more of what you do. Does that make sense?
It does. I came across somebody called Professor Ruth Crick the other day, who's created a tool for looking at learning journeys. And I've said I'd like to have a look at it. And I was struggling a little bit with what a learning journey was initially. And then I realized in corporate world, you call it a development plan. But actually, the way that this is structured is I'm on a new learning journey as somebody who is self-employed from the learning journey I had as a corporate. And what she's particularly looking at is resilient mindset and some of the characteristics you might find there. And I recognized in some environments, that characteristic would be very strong for me, but as self-employed, that they're different. And that was fascinating. So exactly as you say, and there were so many synergies with some of her work and your work, and I could find those connections. And I'm exactly as you say, it's got to be continual, because everything is changing. Even if you still work for the same company, it's changing around you, the people are changing around you, the scenarios are changing. So I think there was a lot there for me about, again, this isn't fix yourself. You've read the book, you've done the things you fixed. It is constantly, and that's why I felt it was a handbook for life, because a new scenario will emerge. You'll have to go back and sort of revisit that.
Yeah, and I think, Elaine, I mean, that you're absolutely right, because there is that bit. Sometimes you read a book and you're like, this, I got it. I can apply this straight away. That's it. It's done. There's a fix, there's a solve. Others are just a reminder. And it's one of the things that we can be positive about, that we can continue to learn and evolve. I love the idea that we are, the leadership is a continuous iterative journey that you can continue to evolve, and that you can create the change, but there will be other changes that happen to you, and each of those changes is an opportunity. And yes, the piece of moving into different environments, different cultures, test different things, or you learn different things. I went from working for big corporates, which I loved, I was really happy in there, to being a startup entrepreneur, which was fascinating, very hard, but totally different ways of learning, and you could feel your mind expanding as you did that. So even though things, you might find yourself in jobs which are really hard, seeing them as learning opportunities can also be, of course, really helpful. You can find the positives in that, definitely.
It gives you permission. It gives you permission not to be perfect, which I think is wonderful. You obviously coached individuals, but in many cases, you've also gone in and supported teams. And I wondered about what transformation you'd seen through a team ethos in the team themselves, or maybe in their business outcomes.
So I did quite a lot of work with executive teams looking at the idea of building a super team. And one of my favorite bits of open sourced culture insight is the Google rework study. So Project Aristotle, as they called it, the whole is greater than sum of the parts. It's absolutely incredible. And it's incredible that that is the sort of thing that everyone can now look at, because that says very clearly, it's not who's on the team that matters, it's how they work together, right? So the piece of being in a lovely position to be able to work with the team. And, you know, I tell you, it's much easier going as a consultant than us doing it as a team. As you know, Stacey knows it's an ongoing challenge for us, an important thing to work out how a team works together. But executive teams are fascinating because they're all, you know, ambitious, opinionated people who all think that they are doing more work than everybody else. But that sense of reminding people, so Patrick Lencioni, the team guru, talks about it's not finance, it's not strategy, it's teamwork. That is the ultimate competitive advantage because it's so rare and so precious. So the impact you have in working with a team to help them work better as a team is absolutely magical. So we do things like I brought in Neil Malarkey from the Comedy Store, who's brilliant for business improv, to do improv sessions with executive teams, you know, and we did an awful lot of work on radical candor, which I'm a big believer in, and working together to help everybody talk about what the positives were they saw in other people, because that's the other thing. You find people at work make up stories in their heads about what other people think of them, and they're always negative ones. And actually, if you sit them down and go, talk about what you respect about each other, it opens up. I suspect that's a, you know, love therapy and relationship therapy trick too. So we talked about the positive, we talked about the polish. So nobody's perfect, as you say, Elaine, and having that conversation about, I think it would be helpful if you could just, and again, having the honesty there. And then the personal bit, the other way around. I recognise, you know, I'm rubbish at throwing too many jobs Stacey's way and saying we've got all these great ideas, right? But having that awareness so that you can then work about it, and having that honesty amongst a team is fantastic, I think, at seeing everybody understand that they're on the same page, that they can row together to make the boat go faster, all the sporting analogies and metaphors you have. Working together to build a great team is one of the best feelings in the world, I think. And that's what people feel good about at work. You know, when you've worked on a super team and you respect each other and you know that you're all contributing, it's incredible.
Thank you. I'm just going to explore a few more ideas with Sophie about resilience and change makers, and then hand over for questions. So if you just want to think about any questions you might have, either about maybe loving work, I'm sure Sophie will take questions on the Marketing Society or just marketing in general. We'll be asking those in a few minutes. There was a section in the Accelerate Evolution called Dynamic Working. And I read that and it really resonated with me with almost, this is how you build self-resilience when you have to deliver phenomenal change in an organization or because something is happening. And I noticed, you know, we're talking about permacrisis or polycrisis or VUCAs and tuners, and, you know, there's lots of phrases out there at the moment to describe this really difficult world that we're living in, when something massive seems to happen every day that we weren't expecting to happen. Could you share what dynamic working is? And then could you talk a bit about, were you thinking about how leaders need to be resilient to drive change?
So did you know that the expression VUCA was first coined in 1984? So, you know, it has been around for a while, of course, the idea of a constantly changing world. But, you know, as we all know, the polycrisis, the permacrisis is just bloody exhausting for everybody, right? So I think there is an acceptance for people that's quite helpful and healthy, that actually this world isn't going to slow down. I have one of my good friends who leads an organization talks about a game you play, it's whack-a-mole, you know, where there's literally, there's another problem and there's another one and that's going to happen. And there's a mindset piece, I think, that's accompanied with that, because again, so another senior leader that I interviewed for the book talked about how she spent years going, I'm just going to get through this bit, then it's all going to be okay. Just going to get through the pandemic, then it's going to all be okay. And of course, you know, when the war hits, and is there going to be a recession? Is there something else? It's never going to stop. So she worked quite hard on acceptance that she wanted to find the positives in between it all. And she wanted to just not have the narrative in her head that said it's all gonna end, it's all gonna be okay, or when your dad's out of hospital and it'll be easy or whatever. There's always something in your personal life or your work life that makes things challenging. Right? So maybe there's just an acceptance there that helps people. And then the big thing we talk about in this book and in my previous book and when I'm talking to people about it is the idea of resilience, which is great because it sounds like you're strong and you're going to, be able to fall over and get back up again. It's really, really good. But how do you actually manage that? And how do you actually say rather than going, I'm going to be resilient? So there's lots of tips and ideas and thoughts around that, but it is also about making sure you've got the energy to get back up again. So the energy management versus the time management, the finding the sparks in your life, that in the sunshine, that's going to give you the energy. So we talk a lot about progress driving pace and actually making sure you've got this feeling that you're going towards your goal, towards your purpose, that you're acting with velocity, speed in the right direction. All that type of thing can give you a lot more resilience. And there's huge amounts of insights around that. I mean, things like there's a proper scientific study that says if you tell people they're halfway through something, they'll always speed up. Just giving people the sense that actually you are moving in the right direction can be really, really helpful with that resilience piece as well. So, sorry, the dynamic working piece is fascinating because that's what people are seeing as the crisis now. The conversations with lots of agency leaders and marketeers about can't get people back in the office. The expectations of the workforce are completely different. They all think I'm a boomer. They all think that it's never going to go back. There's a lot going on there. And again, an acceptance that things have changed, they will continue to change, and there will be a way to make it work. It seems to be helping a lot of people. So I set up my own e-commerce business from London, did it 3 years. This was quite a while back, and did it 3 years. And then I had to run it for 3 years from Estonia, from Tallinn in Estonia. So I ended up with a globally distributed workforce, and this was in 2008 to 2011. We used Skype and we used Skype chat, which is basically like Slack. And we had the most incredible team who were hugely motivated because they could all work with time sovereignty. So they worked the hours they wanted to, where they wanted to, they moved around. So there was an experiment then which showed to me that it was possible. Now it's really difficult because actually, so go back to the marketeers here, but certainly the CMOs I'm talking to, the people who have roles to and lots of pressure, they have to be like octopuses at the moment. They have to be helping with the culture of their teams and the organization. They have to be representing the brand externally. They have to be building their own brand. There's a lot going on. So it's very easy to be exhausted. And I'm going to make a shout out for our chief financial officer today. So we've been doing lots of conversations about the fact she's under a lot of the cosh at the moment. And she said to me in this morning's team meeting, we were talking about sleep, and she said, I slept at the weekend. I'm in a brilliant mood. So sometimes resilience is just the basics of knowing that there are always going to be, the need to be an octopus, the need to play whack-a-mole, these things that are going on, and giving yourself the tools to be dynamic, to be able to flex and change and build something that suits your team, that suits you. And you can do things differently if you need to. Sorry, there's a lot in there. I think it's a big question.
I'm just going to share that you had 10 relevant ways to embrace dynamic working, because the thing I really liked about them is you just said, people think of resilience as being strong. I felt there was a lot of compassion in the 10 things as well as energy. So just share them. By the way, you still buy the book. There's still lots of good stuff in here.
She's giving you all the main points. It's fine.
Not at all. Be proactive. Be outcome oriented. Be trusting. Be transparent. Be vulnerable. Be inclusive. be connected, be compassionate, be authentic, and be intentional. And they just felt to me lovely kind of ways of, if somebody was describing somebody who's a leader, if you exhibited those sort of characteristics, it's a real almost definition of modern leadership and what's required for the future. So although it's talking about how you cope yourself, I was imagining the impact that would also have on whether it's your immediate team or just the team, you know, your peers, or just how you're engaging with your customers. It just felt like a lovely almost manifesto of how to behave as a leader.
I think that the thing is 21st century leadership is much harder. You know, you can't scream if you want to go faster. You have to structure for speed. You can't tell people what to do. You have to story tell. You can't command and control. You have to trust and inspire. Much harder. But I think it suits those people who have marketing skills, but then I'm biased.
But that is a brilliant segue into my final question. All of us as members of Marketing Kind are looking for ways to drive change. We'd see ourselves as change makers. And so from LoveWork, what lessons do you think are particularly pertinent to marketeers and change makers in our personal world, but also being a catalyst for change in this uncertain world we're in?
So, you know, we talk a lot about this idea of change making, and you know, I know it's something we all have in common, the belief that marketeers have always had the power to change minds and behaviors, and that power is incredible, and of course it brings great responsibility to it, but it's also something that can be celebrated, and something that actually makes a lot of the marketeers I talk to love their work, because they do see the impact they can have. You know, if you want to make an impact and you want to make a difference, you can use those skills. I think there's probably a couple of things in the book. So you see there's a quote on the front cover from Professor Amy Edmondson, who we interviewed for the book, who has spoken at the Marketing Society conference before. She is the queen of psychological safety. So for anybody who's leading, but particularly for marketers, that ability to encourage the voices, to make sure that people feel comfortable to argue, to add their ideas, to be part of it, goes back to the team point earlier as well. But creating a culture of psychological safety means you are more likely to get change, because you're more likely to get everybody around you feeling comfortable that they are with you, and for you to get innovation and ideas, because the more you encourage different diverse voices, the more creativity and sharpening of ideas you get. So I think psychological safety is really, really important. And I think that's a key component for people to thrive at work. I think the understanding what direction you're going in is always so important. So, you know, we talk about it as find your fuel. Purpose is a brilliant way of looking at it. Purpose Upgrade is a brilliant book, you know, but I genuinely believe taking the time to work out what your skills are, what position you're in, what power you can have, and therefore what's going to drive you, is the number one way in which you can find the ability to thrive rather than just survive, because then every single day you can be taking steps towards that. You can be using it as this filter, you know, is what I'm doing in line with my purpose? When I talked about, you know, my stripy career, you know, I worked for an organization for a year, and there was a total misalignment of values in the way in which they wanted business to be in a certain way. And it was really, really hard. And understanding, you know, which I never did when I took my first job, that actually you do need to be in a place that allows you to deliver a purpose, if you have a purpose and you believe in a purpose, but certainly to be aligned with your values, I think it's incredibly important. And that, I know, is the challenge that so many marketeers have and want to have, because they understand there's a huge amount of choice as to what you do, and getting the commercial side of things and your conscience right, getting the creativity, but also the commerce. Marketeers are people who join everything up, but have to deal with so many different things. So permitting yourself time to think about you, what you want, where you go, and how you're going to get there on that leadership journey, as you say, Elaine. This is not just about us solving it because we're going to take a different job or we're going to stand up for something else. It's over time, over our 90,000 hours, over however long we hopefully live, can we continue to make an impact and make a difference with what we're doing? I think that's probably worth thinking about if we are wanting to be change makers.
Thank you. That really resonates with me in two dimensions. I think looking a lot of the time at marketeers, as you say, they're the ones looking outside the organization. They're the ones maybe identifying the weak signals of change that's coming. When there's a book called The 12 Powers of Marketeer, and Thomas Barter wrote that, and he talks about marketeers are always having to look in the crystal ball, so can never necessarily be right. And where finance, CFO, is always looking at what's already happened, so it is always right. So your challenge as a marketeer is to show something quite different. And I think in some organizations, the role of marketing, it might not be at the top table, or it might be at the top table, but not perceived as adding strategic value. And therefore that psychological safety to have the confidence to speak out when you're adding some really valuable content, I think is so important. But then the other side of that, of course, is having that inner resilience to be able to go into that space and actually drive that change. So I think that really resonates. And certainly some of the challenges I've had in the past when I've gone into organizations when they haven't had a CMO before, and they say, we want to do marketing. And I said, do you want a brochure? What do you really want? It's that kind of conversation. So I think for marketeers, sometimes as those change makers, but not, we would see ourselves that way, but not everybody else would understand the contribution that we have to bring. So fantastic.
Elaine, that point from Thomas, so Thomas is brilliant and does a lot of stuff. That is a fellow of the Marketing Society. And that point about the certainty you can have when you're a CFO, but I think there's a brilliant thing we can do, which is to bring clarity, if not certainty. And we've just been working. We've got the Marketing Society conferences coming up later this year, and we're continuing to talk about change makers. But this year, our word is illuminate. So this idea of bringing brightness and clarity and illumination, being marketeers as navigators to show the way. I think that kind of clarity and strength is really important. But yeah, maybe it's easier being a CFO. I don't know. Wouldn't suit us, right?
No, too much numbers. Thank you very much for that. I've hogged your time for quite a lot, so I'd like to open it up to anybody else who would like to ask you a question. If you just